Hey, welcome. We're doing things a little different. We're doing our Bible study together, and we invite you to join us. Today, we have with us my lovely wife, Angela Mills, and we have Daniel's lovely wife, Elizabeth, and Elizabeth's lovely husband, Daniel, I guess
Wow.
we could say. And we're just thankful to join you. Today, we're going to be talking about a subject that's really important right now. We're getting off, we've been going through Exodus, we're getting
Mhm.
off of that for now because we're all trying to raise kids. Many of us are trying to raise kids in a real challenging time. Daniel and Elizabeth have four kids under the age of 12,
12.
12 and under.
and our kids are now 21 and 19, and they're still with us because they're not allowed to go to college right now. So we're going to talk to you today about how to help your children through challenging times, through times of stress, times of crisis. You guys are certainly involved with that right now. How's it coming?
Oh my goodness.
She was made for homeschooling. I'm just gonna.
I'm thanking the Lord for their teachers.
Yes.
Yeah, you're a teacher
Yes.
and teach band and choir, mostly choir now, right?
Choir. Yes.
And you've been a teacher for
Mhm.
years. Tell everybody what you taught.
I taught English and speech and drama, a little bit of history.
All right. And so how are the kids doing with all this?
It's pretty good. I think we've we've tried to make not jokes. We don't downplay the coronavirus, but the other day Lucas sneezed and he went, "Ah, Corona!" Like
Yeah.
that's my 8-year-old. So we have been very intentional about hand washing and personal hygiene and not touching their face. And our next door neighbor has come over. We were having dinner with them the same night that school's canceled, but we've really minimized our circle. We're reaching out to our home groups via FaceTime and other things like that. But I think our kids are really resilient. I saw something yesterday that my mom had posted on Facebook, and it was about perspective. And it was about how if we do this right as parents, in 10 years, our kids will remember COVID-19 was serious, but they'll also remember the memories of getting to play in the backyard extra.
Hmm.
The family, I told you the other night we played Password. The
Yeah.
original 1960s box came out. The
Hmm.
password is, and the kids just thought that was so much fun.
Great. Well, if you guys would turn to First Samuel chapter 17, and I want to look at this scripture today because I think this is really an important principle for us as we're raising our kids. Today, let's be honest, we have kids who are going off to college that honestly can't even tolerate a difference of opinion.
Mm,
There's a term that we're calling that these days,
the
snowflakes.
snowflake mentality.
And I'm not saying that we should be coarse or mean with one another. We certainly should be sensitive with one another. But our kids don't even know how to tolerate a difference of opinion, let alone a real crisis.
Mm.
And so we want to look at about how we can teach our kids to be conquerors, to be overcomers in difficult times. Who has chapter 17, verse 32? Does anybody have that? Angie Mills, would you read that?
Yes, actually, I thought I had it. All right, so we've got right here, chapter 2,
Chapter 17, verse
17,
32.
verse 32. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight
Now
him."
let's just pause right here. David
Mm.
is, how old do you think he was at this point
Is
in
that
time?
a boy, 14
He's a
maybe, 15?
lad,
Yeah.
right? He's a little guy. He's the youngest of all his brothers, and I don't remember how many brothers he had. There's a bunch of them. So he's still too young to be considered even somebody could fight in a war.
Mm.
Remember the Goliath? How tall was Goliath? Does anybody
Oh,
remember?
tall.
9 foot.
He was over
9 feet
9 foot
tall.
tall. He was huge,
Mhm.
and he's coming out threatening the entire army of Israel. Nobody will go out and fight him.
Mm.
And here's David. Did you just hear him? Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him.
Mm.
And as we keep going on, Saul, by the way, is the king. Go ahead.
Okay, so Saul replied, "You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a boy, and he has been fighting a man since youth."
He has been a fighting warrior since his youth. Now, do you hear this? This is what most parents would say in a time like this.
Mm.
You're not able to handle this.
Mhm.
And so we try to protect our kids. I want to protect my kids. But in protecting them, I also want to be training them how to overcome, how to be victorious in challenging times.
Mm.
And so you guys are right now at that age. By the way, it's not over for us, 19 and 21. If you're at the age where you want to protect your kids, you guys have been through some hard times
Mm.
over the past couple years, especially. Are you able to tell us about it?
Yeah, I think one of those, obviously, when we were married, my father passed away, and then from that, just grandparents, and then unexpectedly, very unexpectedly, Liz's father suffered a couple major strokes, and the reason that was so hard for our kids and for us is because he was really the spiritual anchor of the family. He was the spiritual leader for not just his own household, but for the in-laws and the outlaws, as we like to call ourselves, the ones who
Yeah.
married in. And so that was a really hard, trying time. Just explaining to our kids how we can support, his widow was his mom, and just through all of that, and we've talked about just in times of a microcosm of that is some of the kids, especially that we deal with in the youth group, haven't lost a grandparent or a parent yet, but dying animals. I know we've both buried
Yeah.
several animals and had to make those decisions, and those are things that are never get any easier to do, but those are things that we hope that we handle them in such a way that our kids will be ready to face those giants later in their life.
Yeah, even right now, you guys went through that 2.5 years ago. We buried within 2 months my mom, her mom, my grandmother, and I had a heart attack. And my son was getting ready to graduate from high school. It was a really hard time, but they did really well through it, I thought.
They did. It was difficult, but it's hard to see their BB go from fun down on the floor playing with the soldiers, from growing up and bigger than life personality to just life ebbing away. That was a challenge for them. Seeing your mom not be able to function without that oxygen. It was just sad to watch that decline. There's also, the sudden death. Like, you didn't realize your dad had a stroke when Ken was just 2 years old and Hannah was in utero. My dad had a sudden stroke. He was battling cancer, so he was battling that particular ongoing long-suffering disease, but he had a massive stroke that he survived, and for 7 months was, vegetable-like, but he was able to come back and function. But Ken, as a little boy, my dad took him everywhere. He was driving a school bus for the local school system, and he was like, Dan Daddy, where's Dan Daddy? Waiting for a new adventure, take him up to the hospital helicopter. And so when we went to see him, Daddy's resting. And that was hard for him to see that. And then, of course, 7 months later to the day, he went home. He was ready. His mansion was ready, and he was ready to meet Jesus. And so then the aftermath, and Hannah always felt like she knew him, but she'd never actually seen him in her eyes. And Ken grew up, what do we do? What do we talk about? So I took where he was, and we talked about what heaven might be like. And now I don't know if there's school buses in heaven, but I said,
I hope not.
I said, Granddaddy might be driving around taking people to see Abraham or, David and John and of course, King Jesus.
But one of the
But,
things that we
anyway.
saw whenever our kids were little, it was amazing to hear a 3-year-old boy say, I miss Dan Daddy. And I watched you guys with your children. You took them to the nursing home when Dad was there, and they did well. They loved on him, and he loved on them. And then I watched them too at the funeral, and they were amazing. And I know it was hard. I know it was painful, still painful. But I know that your kids are learning and they're growing and are becoming overcomers because you've walked them through that.
Right.
As much as we want to protect them from that pain, by protecting them too much, we keep them from being able to deal with it later on in life. Well, we've got a few things that we want to talk about as we continue. The question is, why was David unafraid? Why was he able to stand up to the giant?
Because he knew who his God was.
Yeah.
He
Who's
knew
got
who
verse
his God
34?
was.
Liz, do you have verse 34 right there?
I do.
Would you read it?
But David said to Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine.
Now, his mother's, doesn't it just scare you to death?
Yeah.
Where was his mom? Call Child Protective Services. Do you see what he's doing? He's keeping his father's sheep. He's learning responsibility. Dad's put him out there in a position where he's in some danger, obviously. A lion and a bear. Moms, what does that make you feel like?
Oh my.
Lions attack
Lions
the
and
bears.
tigers
Oh
bears
my.
are mine. But
Yeah.
she was a praying mother, probably praying for his protection, but yet not not overprotection, but letting him go out and become a man, I
Yeah.
guess you would say.
Well, listen to what he said. I love the last line. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will. He who did this will do this. This is an important thing we talk about a lot here, remembering what God has done
so that we can, in those times where we're faced with it again, be confident and stand in what he is. His steadfast is the word, steadfast,
Yes.
that we can be confident in what we're facing now because of what we've been through before.
Yeah, and how about that? And so he probably didn't start off with a lion and a bear. He probably wrestled his brothers first, and it probably worked up to that, right? He probably started maybe hunting rabbits first with the slingshot. He probably was pretty good at it, sounds like, and then he worked his way up. All this, we don't just throw kids into it all of a sudden. We work their way up. How did you guys do that with your kids and the struggles? Do you remember kind of how you walked it through?
I think for me, personally, growing up, I lost grandparents at a younger age. And I think that my parents did a little bit too much to protect me. Of course, Liz and I are both millennials, and we're the beginning of what is known as the snowflake generation. That
You
we
two
were,
are not snowflakes, by
Thanks.
the way.
I
Yeah.
appreciate that. We, and I think that growing up as a pastor's daughter, I think Liz probably had a different experience than I did. Being in church but not saved yet when my first couple grandparents passed away was hard because I didn't have that assurance. Knowing later that finding their journals and their diaries about their salvation and about their Bible studies and knowing that they were secure. You and I have talked about it, and I haven't had to yet, but as a pastor, I can't imagine the day that I'll have to stand in a pulpit and preach a service for someone at their funeral who I don't know if they're whether or not they gave their heart to Christ.
Yeah.
So for me, I was a little, I think, overprotected or oversheltered as a child, and sometimes that shows. I have a tendency to hover or helicopter more. Don't give me that look. I'm admitting it, so you don't have to. I have a tendency to.
Daniel
helicopter
is
or
the
hover.
helicopter mom.
I
All
am
right,
more the
we got it.
helicopter mom than Liz is, but the
I
boys will
might
be.
rub some dirt in it.
Yeah, the boys will be not just the boys. Autumn will be wrestling on the
Yeah.
trampoline with Lucas, and somebody gets hurt, and I want to fix it and solve it. And she's like, "They're not dying." And so I was like, "Okay,
It's good to have that balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, the kids know who to run to, don't they? Well, here's the thing. He would never have been able to face the giant if he had not faced the squirrel first, or not faced his brothers, and the lions and the bears. And so we want to talk about how to take those steps so that our kids aren't just thrown into a crisis and don't know how to deal with it. What are some things that we can do to help our kids walk through it? Right now, certainly is a crisis time. We're talking about a virus. They're out of school. They're worried. They see the news. They kind of sense the fear in parents and grandparents' voices. And so, how do we walk them through these times? And so, let's talk about this. Matthew chapter 5:45. Does any of you have that right there with you? Could somebody read that?
Go ahead, Angela.
Okay, let's see. Many that your children may be of the Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous.
Now, listen, he sends the rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. Good things happen to bad people, bad things happen to good people. It's just the way it is. And we don't understand that. And it's hard for us because we tend to think cause and effect. And by the way, that is the overarching tendency of false religions that you're getting. It's karma. Hey, whenever your mom was sick, did you have guilty feelings? Did you whenever she passed away, did you have guilty feelings? Felt
To
like
deal with that, and,
Yeah.
and then I think even the sudden tragic. My grandmother and my aunt were tragically killed. I had a cousin just a few years right after that was killed, and he was a freshman in college. And just the tragedy of not ever being able to say goodbye. You have more of those. Oh, what if I had have called? What if I
Yeah.
had have done this? Even as a 15-year-old or later on, and as a college student myself. So you wonder that, but it's not the kids' fault, and we have to reassure them that. Of the circumstance, what it is, and that it's not their fault.
That's exactly right. The tendency that we have of putting guilt upon ourselves, somehow thinking that we're responsible, honestly takes that off of God. He's the one that's ultimately responsible. It rains on the just and the unjust. And we have to help kids deal with any feelings of guilt. Because if something's going wrong in the house, mom and dad get a divorce, kids oftentimes feel like it's their fault. What could I have done
That's a big
differently?
one I was thinking about.
Yeah.
I know you and I both had, whether through youth or when you were as an associate or a youth pastor as well, kids just come to you and say, I feel like it's my fault, or they're fighting because of me. And that I think divorce counseling was one of the things that I was really thinking of. Having a best friend who went through that while I was in junior high, I think really shaped me to be compassionate towards those kids, because it wasn't their fault, but they did inherently feel just this level of guilt that they had done or could have done something differently.
That's human nature again, but that's a false concept of God.
Right.
We understand that all things work together for the good to those who love him are called according to his purpose. We understand that God's sovereign and in control. We understand there is some outcomes from our own choices, but a child is not going to be responsible for a major crisis in life.
We always go back to Genesis chapter 3 at our house. I know Liz has written in her notes. Did you want to read that about the fall and why
Yeah,
good things
please.
happen, why bad things happen to good people?
Oh, I just wrote down that it's going to happen simply because we live in a fallen world.
Yes.
That the difference is the paradigm. The difference is that we know ultimately what is going to end up happening, and others don't.
Oh boy. We talk about this passage a lot. Paul says to the Thessalonians, I don't want you to be like those who
Have no hope.
And for that, we always give our kids hope. And so that brings us really to the second thing that we wanted to talk about. Isaiah 55:9 says, as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways. This is God speaking. My ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. That's what you were just talking about, Liz. We have the hope that God is in control. Thoughts on that, Daniel?
Yeah, I think it's funny because although he probably couldn't articulate it as well as his parents can, Cohen has a really great understanding of restoration theology. That God created everything perfectly. Sin entered the world. Because of the fall, all of these things happen. COVID-19 would not have existed in the garden. And I think that as his dad, I'm extremely proud that he can understand those things. I think that for a kid, when they think about the here and now, can be so overwhelming, because the other side of that is Christ redeeming his creation now and in future days. So I think that that's the unsure. That's the part where God is in control. Even as an adult, as a pastor myself, my steadfast worry isn't in the anchor and what he's done for me in the past, or isn't in what I read in the book. It's the unknown of tomorrow.
Yeah.
I think that was my initial reaction with my father. There's the steps of grief that they say that you go through, and of course I fell back and looked at the sky and said, why? But that has been definitely a walkthrough of my faith, and I've watched my kids go through it as well. One of the verses that I clung to a bit was Philippians 4:7, the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. And then, of course, Proverbs 3:5, trust in the Lord and lean not on your own understanding, both of which let us know that our understanding is minimal in comparison to what he understands.
That's just it. That we have a small understanding, but there's so much that God knows that we can't begin to know. What were we gonna say?
I just think that it's great what you all are teaching them, and that what we need to make sure we're teaching everyone is that we have this box figure of who God is, and he is God. He's the king of the universe. He's the master creator. He's Elohim. And I think the more we teach our children that, which you all are doing, Cohen has that great understanding already, and the others do as well, that they're understanding that God is the one who's created this, and he created the perfect world. It was he gave the parameters, just like we give our children, and then there was a disobedience, and then that sin entered in, as you just echoed that. And so that's great to show them who God is and let them know and have that higher view that his ways are higher than our ways, and that his thoughts are higher than our thoughts. And it seems like the world today, we tend to put God down on the same level as other earthly people. It's God. He's God. He's holy, holy, holy God.
Right. And in the conversation of children, I recently have had a conversation with Autumn and Lucas, telling them, in elementary school classrooms, you see the posters that say, the sky's the limit, your imagination is unlimited. Well, that's not true. Your imagination is limited. And watching the realization on their faces when Autumn asked the question, well, when was God born? And I said, he never was born. He always was. And, processing, well, no, and she can't. And so that was a great teachable moment for both her and Lucas to know that, okay, I know what you're saying. I can't grasp it.
Yeah.
That opens the door for this exact point of that God is in control and there are things we don't understand.
And they will understand it better than we realize because Jesus said, "Come to me as the little children." Have that faith of a child. They will have that faith and believe and trust. And so that's what we need to look
So
at.
the idea which we're hitting on here is it's a great teachable moment.
Right.
Whenever you're going through an airport and your kid sees that there's all this stuff you have to go through, it's a great time to teach there are people in this world that are evil. If they're being bullied, it's a great time to teach about a devil who wants to bully and take away from us the things that are ours. It's a great time to teach them, and so that's what we want to continue to do. I think that we're going to come to a conclusion now, and we're going to pick up the rest of this here next time. But again, as you're raising your children, we want you to encourage them, teach them, help them to learn they serve a great God, help them learn there's evil in the world, as Elizabeth said, and remind them of the stories like Daniel was talking about. Hey, when I was a kid, this is what I went through. I got through it. I'm going to be okay. You're going to be okay. Anything else you guys want to share before we move on?
There's a good children's book that's out there called Lifetimes that helps explain that life comes and goes and that there's birth and death, and it's in the view of nature and animals, and that's a good book to go through and talk with your children, and maybe we can put that up on the screen a little bit later and you can see that. That's a good thing to read and show them that it's just part of life, and some people want to shelter them from that, from the experience, but as you have walked through very recently, they have an understanding of more of the whole picture of life, that it's not just about themselves, but there's a God and he has a plan for me, and to learn them to trust his will for their lives. So check out Lifetimes.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for being with us today. We'll come to you again. And in the meantime, know that we're praying for you. Be safe out there, but don't fear. God's got you. God bless.